The fence didn't move overnight, but the truth had been moving for years. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 34 years old and I work as a civil engineer in a small town outside of Asheville, North Carolina. 3 months ago my grandmother, Margaret Walker, passed away quietly at the age of 82. She was the kind of woman who baked boundary. Grandma would just smile politely and say, "Land remembers better than people do." At the time I thought it was just one of her poetic sayings. Now I know it wasn't. The official lawsuit arrived in a thick envelope stamped from the county courthouse. My mother opened it at the kitchen table. Her hands started shaking halfway through reading it. "He's claiming 15 feet, she whispered. 15 feet of land along the entire property line. That might not sound like much, but on a rural property, -1 feet across several acres meant thousands of dollars in value. And the old oak tree, and part of the garden, and the well access. If he won, we'd lose more than dirt. We'd lose history. Why would he wait until now?" I asked. Grandma had lived there for 47 years. No one had ever questioned the boundary before. But then my uncle said something that made my stomach tighten. He tried to get her to sign something last year. We all turned toward him. "What?" my mother asked sharply. He said it was a clarification agreement. Claimed the original fence wasn't placed accurately decades ago. "And did she sign?" "No," he said. She told him she'd already handled it. Handled it? When? How? The court date was set for 6 weeks later. Harold Jenkins walked around town telling everyone Grandma had knowingly encroached on his land for years. She knew she was old, he told people at the diner. Thought she could get away with it. The disrespect burned. But Grandma wasn't here to defend herself. And the paperwork he submitted looked convincing: modern surveys, digital maps, highlighted lines. Professional, calculated. That night I went through Grandma's old desk drawers in her bedroom. If she said she had handled it, there had to be something. She was organized, meticulous. Bills labeled, receipts stacked by year. Every warranty for every appliance she'd ever owned. She was organized, meticulous. Bills labeled, receipts stacked by year. Every warranty for every appliance she'd ever owned. And then I found a folder marked simply, "Property updated." My heart started racing. Inside were documents dated 5 years ago, county survey approval, land reassessment forms, boundary adjustment confirmation, signed, stamped, recorded. She hadn't just handled it, she had officially redrawn the property boundary. But here's the part that stunned me. The new boundary line moved the fence 2 feet further onto her side. She had given up 2 feet voluntarily. Why? I kept reading. Attached was a letter from a licensed surveyor explaining that historical markers from 1968 placed the true boundary slightly closer to her house than the current fence line. In other words, technically, Grandma had been using a narrow strip of land that legally belonged to her property but might appear disputed without proper documentation. Instead of fighting over inches, she corrected it, officially, quietly, and filed it with the county. 5 years ago, she anticipated him, long before he made his move. I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning. The clerk pulled up the digital archive. There it was. Boundary amendment recorded and approved. Public record, time-stamped. 5 years before Jenkins even hired his surveyor. I stared at the screen in disbelief. "She saw this coming," I whispered. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "Smart woman," she said. When we handed the documents to our attorney, he actually smiled. "This," he said, tapping the folder as patience. Harold Jenkins wasn't suing over unclear land anymore. He was suing against a legally updated, county-approved boundary line, and the amendment included notarized acknowledgement from both property owners at the time. My stomach dropped. Both property owners. That means Jenkins signed off, the attorney confirmed. 5 years ago. We dug deeper. Sure enough, in the file was a signature. Harold Jenkins. Dated, witnessed. He had agreed to the corrected boundary back then, but he probably assumed Grandma never kept copies, or that she wouldn't live long enough to matter, or that we wouldn't check. Court day arrived faster than expected. Small county courtroom, wood-paneled walls, local farmers and curious neighbors filling the back rows. Harold Jenkins walked in confidently, tailored jacket, stack of new survey maps. He looked almost amused when he saw us. "You'll see," he muttered under his breath as he passed. "Old mistakes catch up." He had no idea. When the judge called the case, Jenkins' attorney presented first. Color-coded maps, laser pointer, claims of historical misplacement. He painted Grandma as careless, as confused in her old age, as someone who likely misunderstood original survey stakes. I clenched my fists, but we stayed quiet, because patience was still working. Then our attorney stood, calm, measured. He handed the clerk a copy of Grandma's boundary amendment, dated, stamped, signed, including Jenkins' signature. The judge adjusted his glasses. The courtroom shifted. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge said slowly, "is this your signature?" Harold's confidence cracked. "Yes, but..." "No, but is it yours?" "Yes, and this amendment clearly states that the current fence line reflects the agreed legal boundary, correct?" Silence. "Yes." The judge leaned back. "Then what exactly are you disputing?" The room went still. For the first time, Harold Jenkins looked unsure. The judge didn't raise his voice, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. Harold Jenkins shifted in his seat. The confidence he had walked in with was gone, replaced by something tight and defensive. The judge flipped through the boundary amendment again, reading slowly, page by page. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioner hum. Mr. Jenkins, the judge said finally, this document shows you signed a mutual boundary correction agreement on May 14th, 5 years ago. Is there any claim that this signature was forged? No, Jenkins muttered. Were you under duress? No. Did you contest it within the statutory period after filing? His jaw tightened. No. The judge placed the document down. Then this court recognizes the amended boundary as the lawful and binding property line. A soft ripple moved through the room, but it wasn't over yet, because Jenkins' attorney wasn't finished. Your Honor, the attorney said smoothly, my client contends that Mrs. Walker misrepresented historical boundary markers when presenting this agreement. He was led to believe the adjustment was minor, merely correcting a survey discrepancy. Minor. That word hit something inside me. It was minor. 2 feet. Grandma had given up land voluntarily to prevent exactly this kind of escalation. The judge raised an eyebrow. And is that not what it was? The attorney hesitated. Well, the newly commissioned survey suggests. The newly commissioned survey, the judge interrupted, was conducted last year, 5 years after this agreement. Silence again. You could see it happening in real time. The case was unraveling. Then the judge did something none of us expected. He asked for the original 1968 survey records. Our attorney had anticipated this. Grandma's folder contained certified copies. The bailiff handed them over. Old paper, faded ink, hand-drawn markers. The judge studied them carefully. Interesting, he murmured. My pulse quickened. What is it? My mother whispered beside me. I leaned closer. The original markers, the true ones from 1968, actually placed the legal boundary slightly in Grandma's favor, meaning she had legally owned even more land than the amended agreement reflected. She hadn't corrected a mistake. She had compromised. The judge looked directly at Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins, according to the original county survey, Mrs. Walker was entitled to approximately 2 additional feet beyond the adjusted line. The courtroom gasped softly. You signed an agreement that favored you. Jenkins' face turned pale. That can't be right, he stammered. It is right, the judge said calmly. You were given land. The irony settled over the room like dust. Grandma had voluntarily given him property, and he came back for more. Our attorney stood again. Your Honor, we would also like to submit correspondence between Mrs. Walker and Mr. Jenkins dated 3 years ago. I stiffened. Correspondence? I hadn't seen that. He handed over printed emails. Jenkins requesting permission to extend his shed slightly closer to the fence. Grandma replying politely, as long as it stays within the agreed line, I have no objection. Clear, calm, precise. The judge skimmed them and nodded slowly. It appears Mrs. Walker acted in good faith. Jenkins' attorney tried one final angle. Your Honor, my client simply seeks clarity. He believes he was misled. The judge cut him off again. Clarity was established 5 years ago, and reaffirmed through correspondence. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Jenkins, this court does not look kindly upon attempts to relitigate settled agreements without substantive evidence, particularly when the record suggests the plaintiff previously benefited from the arrangement. Translation: you tried to take advantage, and it backfired. The ruling came swiftly after that. Case dismissed, with prejudice, meaning he couldn't refile, and to our surprise the judge ordered Jenkins to cover our legal fees due to frivolous litigation. A public loss. Documented. Final. As people filed out of the courtroom, whispers followed him. Not cruel ones, just disappointed ones. In small towns, reputation is currency, and he had just spent a lot of it. Outside the courthouse, Jenkins stopped near the steps. He looked older somehow. Smaller. My father approached him calmly. You didn't need to do this, Dad said. Jenkins avoided eye contact. I thought she wouldn't, he started, then trailed off. Wouldn't what? Wouldn't prepare. Wouldn't fight. Wouldn't outlast him. He shook his head and walked away without finishing the sentence. That evening, we returned to Grandma's farmhouse. The oak tree still stood tall along the fence line. The chickens clucked as if nothing had happened. Peaceful, steady, just like her. I walked along the boundary myself, measured the distance with my own tape. It matched the amended survey exactly. Perfectly straight, perfectly legal, perfectly intentional. She hadn't reacted to conflict. She had anticipated it, and resolved it quietly before it ever reached court. Inside the house, I found something tucked inside her old Bible. A small handwritten note. It wasn't addressed to anyone specifically, just written in her careful script. Patience is not weakness. It is preparation without noise. I felt a chill. She knew. She always knew. The next morning, a copy of the court ruling appeared in the local paper. Small town headline: Walker estate prevails in boundary dispute. No drama, no spectacle, just facts. Justice served calmly. But there was one more thing we hadn't noticed yet, something even Jenkins' lawsuit had overlooked. While reviewing the county filings again, I spotted an additional clause in Grandma's amendment paperwork. A footnote, one that none of us paid attention to at first, until I read it twice, and realized she didn't just protect the boundary, she protected something far more valuable, something Jenkins never saw coming. The lawsuit was over, but Grandma's final move hadn't even been noticed yet. 2 days after the court ruling, I drove back to the county recorder's office. Something about that footnote in the amendment paperwork wouldn't leave my mind. It was small, easy to miss, buried beneath the boundary description and survey adjustments, but it was written in precise legal language, the kind that doesn't exist by accident. I asked the clerk to pull the full filing history, connected to the 2019 boundary correction. She clicked through the system, then paused. "There's an easement attached," she said. "An easement?" My pulse quickened. For what I asked, she scrolled. "Water excess," recorded simultaneously with the boundary amendment. Water excess. I leaned closer to the screen. The legal description clarified everything. Grandma had granted a permanent access easement not to Jenkins but to the town itself, specifically to the small freshwater spring that ran beneath the old oak tree. The spring, the one that fed her well for decades, the one Jenkins claimed interfered with his future landscaping plans. She hadn't just corrected the boundary, she had protected the water. 5 years ago, when Jenkins pressured her about moving the fence, Grandma didn't argue. She hired a surveyor, filed the correction, signed the amendment, and in the same week, she recorded the spring as a protected, shared access resource under a conservation easement, meaning no private owner including Jenkins could alter, divert, or block access to it. Ever. I felt something settle in my chest. She wasn't just defending her land, she was defending the future. Back home, I gathered the family at the kitchen table again. Dad read through the easement document slowly. His eyebrows rose higher with every paragraph. "She tied it to the environmental preservation statute," he muttered. I nodded. "She worked with the county quietly." Mom looked stunned. "She never mentioned any of this." No, she wouldn't have, because patience doesn't brag, it prepares. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A representative from the county environmental office showed up at our door. A woman in her early 40s, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Walker was a remarkable woman, she said gently. She donated a portion of the spring's access rights to ensure long-term community water stability. Grandma had ensured that even during drought years, the spring could legally serve as an emergency backup supply for nearby farms, including Jenkins' land. I almost laughed at the irony. The man who tried to take her property was legally protected by her foresight. "Did he know?" my uncle asked. The county rep shook her head. "The easement is public record, but it wasn't widely discussed." Mrs. Walker asked that it remain low profile and less challenged. And less challenged, she knew he would push. And when he did, everything would surface at once. 3 days later, Jenkins came to our door. No lawsuit, no attorney, just him. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in his hands. "I didn't know about the easement," he said quietly. Dad folded his arms but said nothing. "Jenkins continued. The spring feeds part of my irrigation system during dry months. We all knew that. Grandma had allowed it for years without complaint. She could have restricted it after the lawsuit," he admitted. "But she didn't." No, she didn't, because she had secured it legally long before he ever filed papers. And she did it in a way that protected everyone, not just herself. She told me once, Jenkins said slowly, "that land isn't owned. It's borrowed." I swallowed. She said, "The real boundary isn't fences. It's fairness." He looked genuinely humbled. "I was wrong," he said finally. Not defensive, not angry, just smaller. And for the first time, I believed him. That evening, I walked to the oak tree alone. The fence stood exactly where the amendment placed it. Straight, clean, undisputed. But the true victory wasn't the fence. It was the spring bubbling quietly beneath it. Steady, unmoved, protected. Grandma could have humiliated him publicly years ago, could have exposed the boundary discrepancy, could have enforced the original 1968 survey and reclaimed the extra defeat. Instead, she adjusted, she compromised, she documented, and she waited, not for revenge, for truth. The following Sunday, the local paper ran another small article, this time about the conservation easement. Margaret Walker's quiet gift secures community water access. People began stopping by the farmhouse with casseroles and flowers, not because we won a lawsuit, but because they realized what she had done. She had protected something invisible, something most people wouldn't notice until it was gone. I found one last note in her desk drawer that night. It was folded inside an old utility bill envelope. Her handwriting was smaller this time, more fragile, but steady. "Justice doesn't need applause. It needs timing." I sat with that for a long time. Jenkins had tried to rush the narrative, force it, corner it, but Grandma understood something he didn't. Patience isn't passive, it's strategic. A week later, Jenkins approached us again, this time with a different tone. He offered to repair part of the fence at his own expense, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. My father accepted, not as victory, but as closure. And just like that, the conflict ended, not with shouting but with correction. Grandma never stood in that courtroom. She never defended herself publicly. She never argued on the courthouse steps. But she didn't need to. She had already done the work, years earlier, quietly, precisely. patiently. Now when I walk the property line, I don't see offense. I see foresight. I see discipline. I see a woman who understood that the loudest fight isn't always the strongest one. Sometimes the strongest fight is the one you win before anyone knows it started. If this story reminded you that patience is power, if you believe preparation defeats greed, if you believe justice doesn't always shout, sometimes it waits, then don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who underestimates quiet strength, and subscribe for more stories about wisdom, resilience, and victories that come with time.